Hey, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health Matters, the podcast that breaks down stigma, makes mental health okay to talk about around the dinner table, around the water cooler, on the virtual platform that you're using in this crazy, wild world we live in of COVID. So it is I, Tom Duff, Executive Director, Therapist at St. Louis Counseling. If you are curious about our services or if you like sponsoring this podcast, check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. Spell out stlouiscounseling.org. As usual, we have on intriguing guests. I'm really excited today because I know this guest very well. She's one of our own at St. Louis Counseling. It is LaTrece Smith. LaTrece, how are you?
Fine, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, I was pretty excited. We finally, one, we get to be in person to be able to do this. And two, we've tried before because sometimes the virtual platforms don't always work out for us.
Right.
Technology isn't, it's great, but sometimes it isn't great. So I'm glad we're in here today. So LaTrece is, I look at her as a little bit of a Renaissance woman. She started with us at our agency anyway, as a therapist, was working on her licensure. She's now one of our regional office directors, and she's also our racial equity coordinator. Mm-hmm. On top of that, she already had an MBA before visiting us. So she's had quite a lot of life. So, and you became a therapist a little bit later in life, mm-hmm. right? So let's talk about that just a little bit. Like because you got your MBA and you're in corporate world, right? Mm-hmm. And then what kind of said to you like, hey, you should be a therapist? How did that happen?
Well, I think I've always been a therapist in all of the settings. I have a bachelor's in economics and came out and worked with the banking world for a bit. But always trying to coordinate things with HR and coordinate things with people in my department, just a social worker in a corporate setting. Mm-hmm. I got married, had my son, decided that I wanted a little more and went into corporate retail. Mm-hmm. And it just wasn't enough anymore, mm-hmm. right? I decided that I needed to really get on to do social work. Mm-hmm. And I knew that was in my being. Started out, my parents wouldn't pay for me to go to college for social work. Mm-hmm. So I had to major in something they deemed, sorry, Mom and Dad, but that they deemed would make me money and not be in their basement, mm-hmm. to put it that way. So I majored in like accounting, economics, and those things. So corporate retail for a little bit and really kind of enjoyed it, right? I like the business part. I like the model of it being efficient, mm-hmm. making money, but just not a lot of talking about social things that were going on in the company. The money mm-hmm. mattered more, right? Mm-hmm. And not maybe the employees' happiness. So decided in 2014, I think, that I would go back to school at Washington University to get my MSW. My plans were a little different, took a little more time than I anticipated, but they really wanted to impact lives in private practice and one-on-one in therapy. And mm-hmm. the children thing came later, but I'm sure you'll ask about that. But just enjoy it. I don't regret a moment of it. It's taking a little time with the pay to get back to, there's a difference, but I think the happiness of doing what I feel called to do makes up for the difference, and it's just been wonderful.
Yeah, it's and I hear that from a lot of people in our field, social services, social work, whatever you want to call it, therapists, that there is a calling, and there's a need, and that moment they start realizing like, work, I'm in work a lot, and I want it to be purposeful.
Right.
And not to say that, corporate America isn't purposeful, because it is, but for the individual to find that purpose and to reach community. And that's a lot of times, where we're at, and you working, starting out at our agency, working in our school partnership program and working with those kids, right? And being able to make that impact on that level. So like you said, private practice was in your head, but then you kind of like all of a sudden working with kids. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, I think that initially my first job out of graduate school was with BHR and on the crisis line. And I knew that I wanted more face-to-face interaction, but it really grew my skills of listening, right? Because you didn't have the person in front of you working with you. You had to listen for things in the background. You had to really listen to what they were saying, and really helped me to understand suicide and mental health in a different way, because most of the people we saw there would not have shown up in an office, right? So I started there, but really wanted to grow my skills face to face. So that's when I came over to St. Louis Counseling. Was Catholic Charities at the time, but
Catholic Family Services.
Catholic Family Services.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, and then St. Louis Counseling now, and I started, like you said, with the school partnership program. If you can see, I'm in my head. I'm taking the little hash marks, but I enjoyed the time with the students. I was in a elementary school and a middle school in St. Louis Public Schools, and I don't know, it's just amazing. It's like the kids they just open up so much, and I can't tell you the number of times they said, I've never told anyone this. And then once they've had an opportunity to talk about it and really work through it, the light comes on, and you can almost see the light come on. And it really just touched my heart in a way, because now some of those kids can have different outcomes. Right? And it was really important for me, for them to see me in the role, because most of the students were African American. And for them to see me, to give them a look at something they can be, and also have that connection of maybe understanding some things that they may be going through, maybe able to reach out to their mom and have a conversation with their mom or their dad in a way that I understand. And they don't have to explain certain things to me, but open enough to hear them and accept them where they are.
Well, and I remember, so I was in Leadership St. Louis, hashtag Focus St. Louis. We'll tag them in the bio. But I was in the Leadership St. Louis class, and we were assigned random schools. I think it was 2017, right? And so part of it was understanding, some of the school crisis that goes on in our communities and everything of that nature. And so the school I was assigned to go listen and take a tour of, I was listening to the principal come in and talk, and a few other people. That was one of your schools. I don't know if you remember this or not, but so I'm sitting there, and I was like, okay, we're in this school, and they start talking about, and we got this counselor, and she's amazing, and she's working. I think it was Catholic Family Services at the time. She's assigned here from there, and she just has done so remarkable of a job, And I'm like, glad. No. But the reality was, hearing from the faculty perspective as well too, what a school therapist, what you specifically were doing, but what the impact a school therapist can have on the entire classroom, not just the kid you're helping, but how all the other kids can then maybe learn better, because you're helping the kid that might be struggling to understand themselves better. You actually make impact on others, and that's one of the cool things when I think about the school partnership program and the impact that you made. So kudos to you, and because at the time you were like, I just switched careers.
Right. And you don't know the impact, but like you said, you're in the halls too. You're in the building. So if there's something going on with another kid, you're saying, hey, what's going on? Or you eat lunch with them, and you do things to build relationships. So you do impact the whole school.
We know, and you mentioned being an African American therapist in a school, predominantly African American kids, but in general, right, in the field, we don't see a lot. There's definitely not a majority of African American therapists. It's generally female, Caucasian is generally what we have. Even I'm a minority as a male in this field as well too, in that sense. But the importance of being able to be that model, to do modeling for kids culturally. You talked a little bit about sometimes just because someone looks like you, you can break down a wall that otherwise is there. If someone doesn't, look like you, sometimes that barrier is there, and it's something else the client or the kid has to try to explain.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, one aspect of the importance of, maybe how do we get more people of color into not just social work, but being therapists as well too? Because there's a difference. There's social workers that are more case management focused. But what do you think of that importance? What have you experienced? And when you were going through school, was that something you noticed as well too? Like, there's only so many of me around. And why is that?
Right. I think good question. So in school, I'll start there, that I did notice that there were not a lot of people that look like me. For a couple reasons. I kind of, like I said, it was my second career. So then there's the age difference. A lot of people came right out of undergraduate to graduate school, but also African American. And it was tough for a lot of different reasons. And I did notice, and it's really hard. I think you have to be committed to it. And I'm not saying that there aren't people of color that aren't committed to it. I just feel like it is really hard to live in a world and experience things every day, and then to make that your career. Like there's not a stop button, right? You are what you do, right? You service people that look like you, and you go out and you're having the same struggles. And so it is really a really big decision for an African American to go into social work. I do think that a way that we could possibly get more people into the field is to, I don't really know. I've thought about that question because I knew you would ask.
It's like you know me or something.
I think first we gotta say that there are a lot in the field, right? I think if we gotta start from that vantage point to say we're out there, right? I think if we start from, well, people just aren't coming in the field, and we just don't have, they're not available. They're available. I've met a lot of people that are doing a lot of good work. I just think we got to look for them. It may take a little more to do that, but I think it's so worth it, because it's almost like you get a bonus when you have an African American therapist. Not saying better, but if you have someone that has kind of they're living it. Yeah. They're marginalized, right? Yeah. And so in your organization, if you have that person and they're thinking in a social work a better good for others, then it makes your organization that much stronger, right? Because they are able to provide a different insight, a different help you to serve the people you're serving in a deeper way.
And you make a good point, thought-provoking point as well too, in the sense of you're, as an African American female working with an African American client, you're helping them guide through that, right? And then you have to walk into the same world you're trying to guide them through for whatever struggle they may be working with.
Right.
It may be different on certain levels, but still, being a person of color, you have to go ahead and walk in that world afterwards, compared to me, right, who I may be able to empathize with you as a client and understand where you're coming from, but then I don't have to go walk in the same exact shoes. So that level of stress, so like when you described it as, it's hard because, and you got to be committed because you're going to be walking in some of the same stuff that you were dealing with all day long with your clients, right? And so I think that's an interesting, so I guess my question is, how do you manage that? How do you take care of yourself when your work world kind of mirrors some of your everyday world as well too?
Yeah. Sam, you got some great questions.
Well, today it's Thursday and the sun is out, so I'm on a roll today. So yeah.
So carefully, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think you learn as you go. Initially, you may feel like you're a therapist, and so maybe as you're talking to your client, your world doesn't mirror like what they're going through until you go out and something happens to you, and you understand that it's bigger than just your client. It's something bigger in the world. And so, as you know, what we have going on now in our world, with the country kind of being split like right down the middle, and it's politically, but it's also some racial, definitely things on that. So I have to check out. I mean, I can just speak for myself, but I think a lot of my coworkers, we check out. We check out and check in, right? Because you can't stay out of it too long. Of the news. But real life, when things happen, we process them, talk about them, and bring it back to therapy. I mean, I think that it's an understanding. So say one of my middle schoolers gets pulled over by a officer, and they tell me about some things that happened, and it's traumatizing for them. Well, my husband's driving, he'll get pulled over by an officer, and there's some things that happen that I don't think would happen to us if we weren't people of color. And so what I do is take those experiences and say, when my middle schooler is telling me, I can understand, and there's a deeper understanding of what he has gone through. And I use it in therapy, and it seems to not hurt. It's wrong, right? And it shouldn't happen, and I will fight to the end to make sure that things are fair. But I think in a weird kind of way, it helps me to help that middle schooler to kind of process those emotions and work through that.
So you kind of take that negative event and try to empower yourself from that for good, so to speak, because like you said, shouldn't be happening, right? And you want to continue to create change and stop it, and we don't want it to occur. But when it does happen, how do you change it, or how do you manage it for good on some level,
right?
And that's how you. So yeah, I get that where you're coming from with that. I'll try not to have any more thought-provoking questions on that level. But no, that's the beauty of why when I get together with LaTrece, it's like, because the beauty is like we can ask each other questions and gain perspective. And I think that's where our world needs to get, is understanding each other, the differences, the similarities, or however you want to look at it. But the conversation, it's conversation, and the impact it has. And so when we talk about, mental health, we're kind of hitting so many things today, not only the clients you serve, but also how to maintain your own mental health in troubling times, being a person of color, as well. And self-care is important for everybody. And we always preach that. And sometimes some of us as therapists are not always the best. We take care of ourselves. We're always taking care of others. So we have to make time to do that.
Right.
What do you think, when you look at I hear a question from a lot of people, like kids today, they seem to be really troubled. How can we get back to how they used to be? And sometimes my question is like, I don't think we need to get back to how it used to be. And I think all these problems are still around. I think social media, I think the media, I think news. I mean, we have just more access to everything, and we can see things that happen in different states and different towns. But I mean, from working with kids, middle-aged kids, that would be me, a middle-aged kid. But do you see themes that kids are struggling with nowadays, so to speak, more than others? Or is it really just ongoing world that we live in, and anxiety's always been there and depression's always been there? But do you see any different themes that have emerged?
Well, I think not so much themes, but I feel like this pandemic has really done a number on kids, because at that age they're social, it's about their friends, it's about the interaction that really helps them to grow. But I do feel like they just want to be heard. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's not a lot of places where they are heard. Mm-hmm. And if we listen to them, and listen to them knowing that they are going to live a different life than we have, and it'll be a different world, and knowing that they have been created to live in that world, I think we'll hear a lot. Not so much themes, but just listen. Mm-hmm. Have that time. I was blessed to have grown up with older people who paid attention to me, and really made my voice important, right? They sat down with me, and if they called me over, like grandmother, cousin, older people that thought that what I had to say was important. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what we need to do with the kids. I think everyone needs to start listening to them and find your own themes. I mean, find the people that are in your community, because we need the older people to kind of give some advice or maybe help out along the way. I think if kids had more of that, they wouldn't be choosing some of the decisions that they make, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know, and I just really think we should listen to them, and I think that's the biggest thing, because if we listened to them, maybe they wouldn't have the struggles they're having. Mm-hmm.
Makes a lot of sense, and listening to somebody is free. Yes. It's sometimes hard to do, I guess. Depends on how you're wired,
what they're
I
saying,
guess.
Right?
But but the reality is, if someone feels heard, the value of that, and you mentioned that, that you felt listened to by somebody. So when somebody's showing that interest in you and they're willing to sit down, that alone can go a long way.
Yes. And maybe you'll be a social worker or someone that gives back to the community because you feel like your voice has been heard and it's important. Mm-hmm. And so therefore I can help others with it. So
makes total sense. Yeah. I like how you brought that back full circle. To my very first question. I mentioned earlier, you're our racial equity coordinator at our agency. And we had somebody before you in that role, and you moved into that role back in September, something like that, way back in 2020, back then. Let me ask you this question. Why? Because we see a lot more organizations, not just nonprofits, but even corporate America, like having positions for diversity, inclusion, equity, and there's positions formed for those at those companies. Why do you think? How would you explain why that's important to have at a place of business? Because I know there's a segment of the population out there like, why we got to have that for? Everybody's equal, and that's just the way it should be. But why do you think it's important to have a somebody devoted to that?
Good question again,
Yeah,
Tom.
yeah.
But it's important because we know that America is built on race, right? Racial differences and just injustices according to race, right? And those injustices that we started out with have somehow made it into our institutions, and it's not something that's written. It's kind of in the systems. It's in the processes, and it's something that we can't really put our finger on. So I believe that it will always be important in America to have someone to hold us accountable, right? And look at what we're saying and then what we're doing. If there is not a position like that, we can kind of make a great mission, right? And not hold ourselves accountable to it. Because race in our country, unfortunately, is something where things are still happening. People are still being discriminated against. Lives are being lost. People aren't getting equitable positions. You know, they're not being promoted in a way that they should because of race. And so as long as we continue to have those issues, we're fighting for that. We're fighting to make sure that that doesn't happen. But I think it's important that we have an accountability structure. And these positions kind of pave the way for that. But I think we can do a lot more in these positions. I think sometimes organizations hire for these positions, but just to say they have it, right? But I think those roles need to be supported more in a way that they can be honest and there could be like this true accountability for what we're doing. Really hear from the people you put in the role, right? The person you hired for the role. Just make sure that you're listening. And sometimes those conversations will be hard, right? Because you have to look at yourself and you look at your organization to see how we line up. Is this the way that we want to go? But then make those hard changes and have those hard conversations. So long story short, those positions are needed. And I believe that they should be held by people of color. I think do all you can to hire someone in that role to so that they're able to be free enough to have the discussions that they see. It's tough. And I'm speaking for me in this way. Sometimes when you are in a position and you're in a position, a racial position, and you're the only African American, it's just tough sometimes you have to go through maybe 5 layers of things before you actually even say something in a meeting, right? Because I don't know if people know, but historically, my great-great-grandmother, how she felt about race and being harmed by white people, she passed on to my great-grandmother. Then my great-grandmother passed it on to my grandmother. And so in our conversations, we pass down recipes, right? So we definitely pass down some of the things, some of the fears, some of the things that have happened historically to us. And so a person sitting in front of you, just because they're in a position, they still have to communicate and kind of work through the things that their great-great-grandmother went through. And so as I think about America and race and in this role, I'm very grateful for it. I'm standing on the backs of so many people sitting here, but I want to do justice by it, right? And do the right thing. But the organization also needs to help do the right thing. So I'm saying for us and also for other people, if someone's in that role, it's a two-way thing, right? It's not just placing someone in the role and then you go do everything. It's about a partnership, and both are in it together and growing and learning and changing.
Well, I think you described that great, to my great question. But I think the way you described that, right? That like a person, if you're the only person of color and you're trying to bring something to the table or bring up, well, let me wave the flag on this. There's like 5 more steps that you might be walking through than like what I would walk through,
Right.
because of what has shaped not only you but other generations, and
Yes.
what your culture, even just your family culture, right? Because everybody has their own culture within their family or their own house, and things of that nature. And all of those things impact that ability. So the importance of having, well, not only the position at businesses, but the ability to bring forth the partnership that it takes to give you the voice as well too. I think that's enlightening for people, because a lot of times and until you hear explanations like that, even like the recipes, right? Breaking it down just like that, everybody can relate to that, right? Everybody can relate, like, well, there's a recipe that's been passed down. I don't care what culture you come from, what color you are, there's recipes that have been passed down. The same thing happens with that. And to put that into words is important, because so if change starts now and you're able to tell your kid something, then your grandkid something, then your great grandchild something. That's how it changes. But that's what's the frustrating part too, is how long is it going to take, right? And we've talked about that too. It's like how long change takes sometimes, but that's why we're in it trying to do the work now for generations of tomorrow,
Right.
to make change.
Right.
See, it's always enlightening when we talk, because then my mind starts going 100 different places, and then all of a sudden, we're out of time.
Right.
Let me ask you I'm switching gears again, but what's good about being a therapist?
It's such a forgiving field, I think, because it's practice. And when you're in front of someone and you make a mistake, it's like you put it into therapy. And it's not like you have to do a review and then you get a mark for it. And I mean, I like it for that reason, but I think I love it for the interaction. You meet people at really challenging stages of their lives, and you see them do the work, and you see them elevate and become someone else that they didn't know that they could become. And I love that part of it. I also love just being in the space of peace and quiet with someone and listening to their story and helping them to kind of navigate through it. I don't know. I mean, it's just everything about it just gives me energy. It's what I love. It seems to agree with who I am as a person, in providing and giving to others. With the regional director role, though, I'm learning to help others with it. And I'm enjoying. I'm also a practicum supervisor. Love that. Really paying it forward to the next generation of social workers, therapists. It's just really enjoyable. I think that if someone out there is thinking about it, just really look into it. Look into what it does and what it offers you. There's so many careers that you can, from an MSW, you can do so many things, and it's so flexible, and it really allows you to touch the people that you really care the most about. So I could go on and on,
Wow.
but I really enjoy it.
No, that's a good sales pitch. We're like trying to reel them in. Yeah.
Come on.
No, it's a great career. It really is, and it truly is. And for me, it's something different every day too.
It is.
I worked in residential care for a long time, and that was something really different every day. But really, I mean, because you're dealing in a lot of different challenges for people, and it keeps our minds challenged as well
Yes.
too, because we're always researching and looking up things, and then applying it to other similar interventions we've done and stuff. It keeps
Yeah.
us alive on a lot of levels.
True.
And that word you described, energy, and I think that's something that's so important because, when you're with a client or an individual in this therapeutic relationship, what you bring to the table as the therapist can mean so much. If you can bring energy into that session and bring energy into that person's life,
Yeah.
it's life altering on a lot of levels.
It is. It is. It's great. It is great. I think that people, I don't know if they realize, therapists out there, how much you pour into people. I think sometimes we don't get a chance to talk to one another and say, you're doing a great job. I mean, it's just one of those fields, right? You don't get like the yay, like the cheerleading crew when you come into the office, but you're doing great. We're doing great work, and I think we gotta keep telling ourselves that, do your best and continue to grow and ask yourself questions. And it's one of the only fields I've been in that I can say, I kind of messed that up. Okay, what do I need to do? Like, how do I grow from this? How do I learn from this situation and move forward? And then I tell the client I'm with, you know what, I messed that up, right? I'm sorry about that. And how can I help? And I think it allows the people that we're with to understand that they also can make mistakes, right? And I don't know of, especially not in corporate America, you weren't talking about your mistakes in banking, and I did some teaching too. You didn't know about that.
No.
So
confidential stuff
so
now. Yeah.
Stuff you didn't know about me. I've been all over the earth.
Yeah.
But it's just a great field to be able to say, I made a mistake, and what do I do about it? And you have the space in the room to do something.
Yeah, you mentioned the word forgiving, and I think a lot of times in therapy, and then I think just a lot of times in life and where we're at as a country as well too, but it's like forgiveness and grace, I think, are two themes that I've tried to use through practice as well too, but offering those concepts to people and what it does, and sometimes when people are coming into us and they're beating themselves up on so many different things, and whether it's the perfectionist that is doesn't never feel that they're doing everything right, and giving them the ability to be forgiven on certain levels, and then offering grace to one another, that we don't have to be perfect, and we're not perfect, and I know this gets grace, the term grace gets a little spiritual at times, but there is a component to that that is so important in counseling and therapy, that we recognize those aspects of allowing us to be present, to be in our own worlds, our own space, and that's okay. We may not agree with it, but offering some grace, and maybe we want to move them to a certain down the road on that journey, but we got to allow where they're at.
Right. And that also plays into, as we do the racial equity work, right? I think that so many times we want to put somebody in a box, and they are this and they are that. And I think sometimes having some grace, and it's tough, being a part of the marginalized community, right? And you feel like, I don't owe you any grace. Like I don't, and I don't want to, but I think we all owe each other some because we get it, right? And so I think that allows the racial equity question and conversations to really move forward, to be able to have that grace. Like if someone says something that offends you, kind of choose not to be offended. Give them a little grace and talk about it. Not everybody's going to want to move forward with their thoughts or their biases or whatever they're thinking, but give them the grace. Like, give it up and receive it, right? I think that helps that part of our business to grow do the things we needed to do as well.
Well, and it allows you to, like you were describing that when it comes to equity and race and the racial issues that are out there. But sometimes when we hear things or see things, it's like the wall goes up, and you put the person in the box, right? But then if you allow them to have some grace to understand where they might be, why would they think that? It allows you to go, okay, why would they think that? And why would they say that?
Right.
And to ask those important questions of why.
Right.
And I think we were talking the other day too about, if we could get people to just be reflective, we may not change when it comes to race, and maybe we're dealing with somebody who is maybe a very racist person, and we all think it, we all feel it. But if we get that person to just be reflective on their actions and their thoughts, that's a win on a certain level, instead of them just having a wall.
Right.
And of course, we don't want it to exist, but at least if someone's reflective,
Right.
they're able to just that means they're at least willing to explore the topic.
Right. Right.
And I don't know the magic answers for that, but I think when we chip away, right, and to look at those small wins, that's what sometimes empower us to keep going,
Right.
Which is the hard part.
It is. It is. Yeah, because, you don't want to, be a person that's always saying, oh, my goodness, it's that race.
Yeah.
But I think if we think about people of color, as you are going through life, race is it's there every day. You didn't choose it. You can't change it. You don't want to change it. But if it's a luxury for people that are whites, right? That are not of color in POC, right? Right? But it's a luxury, and it feels like when someone of color brings up race, you can almost see the shoulders drop, or white people say, well, here we go again with race. But I think it's important to know that that's every day, all day with a person of color. And I don't know if when we have that conversation, if it's something that we think about. I'm just saying, when we're given that grace, right? And we're just thinking about, okay, let me put my feet in their shoes for a minute, right? And let me see, they bring it up all the time. Man, it must really be something to this for them in their lives. So,
well, made me think of another question, right?
Okay.
So, for a long time, as through my years, right, you hear people say, I'm not racist. I don't see color. You're just a person and I like you, right? And then I'm starting to hear now people going, well, I do see color. That doesn't mean I'm racist, but I'm actually seeing color, that there is a difference, and I should acknowledge that. What do you say to people that say, and so I agree, I see color, right? I believe in that concept, instead of saying, I'm not racist. I see you as LaTrece. There's nothing there. You and me are the same. We're human beings, right? I think there's a lot of people that still believe that.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily believe that. But as a person of color, what do you think of that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first off, when they say they don't see color, I don't believe them. I think they need some glasses or to be able to see, I think.
Unless they're colorblind, yes.
Right.
Then yes, I get it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I'm just saying that it's telling the person of color that I gotta lie in order for you to be important.
Interesting.
Right? Because if you tell me that you don't see color, you're saying that I don't exist, right? Because I'm just like you, and the differences mean, if I say I see difference, then I gotta have a hierarchy, right? And that's for me. I just think when they say they don't see color, I'm like, And then it goes on to say how many black friends they have, and then how many, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. And it just lets me know that they're not comfortable talking about race, and for whatever reason. And so, yeah, it's not a wonderful thing to hear.
Yeah, and I think you explained that well, and from your perspective, right? What that means if someone says, I don't see color, you know, there's a meaning to that for you. It's not, you're not taking that as, oh, thank you, you see me as a human being,
right?
And it probably is a mechanism to avoid uncomfortableness, because everyone always wants to feel comfortable, and they want to keep well, not everybody, but they want to keep conflict away. So, and that's the beauty of conversation, right? For me to hear your perception of that, for the people listening to hear the perception of that, and that's what it's about, right? Is to have the conversations and the willingness to talk, and to hear different perceptions on that. I had no idea that's how you were going to respond to that. That's like, you don't even see I exist, you know. That's the feeling, you know, and that's where the whole mental health side of this comes into play, you know, where you know, we always preach that everyone has mental health, right? And some of us have a mental illness that we're dealing with, but we all have mental health that flows up and down every day. So from a race perspective, you got someone saying, and you may be perfectly fine that day, your ebb and flow is nice and chill and you're good. Then someone says, I don't see color, you know, that then a race issue affects your mental health, right? Because it's like, here we go again, you know, and it may not have a huge impact, you know, on that day, but it still made a little wave, you know. And that's what so much of people in our world don't get, you know, the other person's perspective. So.
And you don't have the room to talk about it. When someone says they don't see color, you have been conditioned to be like, okay, you know, like and not everyone can talk about how that feels to them. Like they may not feel like I do. Some people may like that. Some people of color may like that. But I'm just saying, you don't, the structure of organizations and the structure of institutional racism doesn't allow for the person of color to express themselves in a truthful way. It's not safe. It's not safe for them to say that, because so many things come with that. There's, you know, kickback, your job, and, you know, promotions, and just all those things that come with that. So I think freeing up, I'm going back to the one question about bringing more African Americans into therapy and into social work. I think it's two-part. That freeing up your organization, making your organization safe for people of color, to be able to express themselves, or to be able to talk about things that concern them, and not having like a backlash, or now that person's not promotable, or that person is not this. And then as people of color, coming to the table and freeing yourself up with some of those things. Like when the environment's safe, right? You feel that the environment's safe, do the things that you should do to help the organization to get to where they need to be. So I think it's both sides, right? I think we both have to work together in order to really make racial equity a thing in organizations. So
back to that
I keep going back to racial equity, right?
Almost like you have a passion,
I wonder about,
right?
is that my job?
A little passion for it or something. But it goes back to that word you said earlier, partnership, right? That's what it's about. So and that's partnership from an equity standpoint. It's from a standpoint of a therapeutic relationship, that partnership that we enter in with somebody else. So yeah. Enlightening stuff, LaTrece. So as always, we get into lots of fun questions and things of that nature. So Well, we've kind of we've covered a lot today, so we could probably go a couple more hours, but I won't do that to you because then I'll start going into my comedy routine, and then you'll be like, "Yeah, exactly, yeah." Well, you got it down, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, this has been great. What would be one last bit of advice you'd give to anybody that's out there that's maybe considering the field of being a therapist?
Go for it. I mean, I think that it is, well, you know what? I would say research, right? Research it and really look into your skills and the things that you're looking for in a career. It's definitely worth looking into. It is not for the weary, right? It is not for those that aren't committed to it and have a greater commitment than just a job, right? It's something that you really give yourself to, but it also gives back to you. So I would say look into it. And, you know, if you feel like you can make it in the best schools, apply to the best school. I did. I mean, I went to WashU, and initially, you know, there was some thoughts like, oh God, I don't know about this, but I looked into it and I really had some ideas about what I wanted to do, and I researched it and I applied. So I would say go into the field. I mean, I think if all those things check out, go for it, because it's really, really a wonderful field.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, we'll call that Words of Wisdom with LaTrece.
All
So
right.
I love it. So if you're interested in any of our services at St. Louis Counseling, or if you're wanting to talk to one of us, feel free to go to our website. That's stlouiscounseling.org. Check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. And ultimately, thank you, LaTrece. Great conversation. Love having you on. And we will be seeing you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
All right. Until next time, mental health matters.
Bye.